Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Eli, for having me here. Just a really quick introduction. At one time in my career, I was both a certified wildlife biologist with the Wildlife Society and a certified forester with the Society of American Foresters. But for the last 20 years or so, I've really done more at the kind of a large scale policy program coordination type of level. And so I'm really pleased here. I'm, now the executive director of the Minnesota Forest Resources Council. And in kind of the remarks that I have here at the beginning, since I'm kind of coming up first to bat, I get to kind of have the benefit of maybe talking about things and that are kind of maybe already obvious to all of us, but perhaps providing context as we think about and listen to the speakers that follow here. And so in doing that, let's see here. My theme is really has to do more with scale, thinking about scale in geography, thinking about scale over time. And when we're talking about forests and wildlife, forest management is really habitat management for wildlife. And so what we're trying to do here, of course, is think about how these two work cooperatively together for the benefit of both the forest resources and the wildlife resources and overall the ecology of the site. Very important. So in thinking about scale, I'm going to talk a lot about kind of how the Minnesota Forest Resources Council, which was established 25 years ago, has been working at these various different scale levels of geography to try to integrate forest management with wildlife management and with a lot of other natural resource management values and appreciated interests. And so, those scales that we have been working under were established by the Sustainable Forest Resources Act in 1995. And they're very simple concepts of local site level scales, kind of this forest stand level scale, regional landscape scales, and statewide policy and other type of programmatic scales. So kind of looking at this from that perspective, the wildlife integration of wildlife values at the site level in our forest management decisions really start with a set of guidelines that the MFRC was charged to develop that help provide guidance to foresters and loggers for forest management and timber harvesting, again at the site level. And those guidelines, there's 600 pages of the guidelines, very extensive set of guidelines, but just again simply some examples of how some of those guidelines work of providing retaining live trees and snags for wildlife and providing those trees to help provide future structure in a stand, leaving woody debris and slash on the ground for mammals, small mammals and other sorts of values, protecting wetland and riparian areas from being damaged through the harvesting or management activities, trying to key people into avoiding impacts to threatened and endangered species, and also trying to promote some of the irregular or soft edges around the managed sites. And many of these things tie in with what I just saw that were some of the themes that came out of the previous workshop, where they were identifying some of these priorities going forward. So then also thinking about at the landscape level, how do we integrate wildlife and forestry at the landscape level? Well, a lot of that in terms of what MFRC's been doing is been coordinating the development of plans and the implementation of plans through multifaceted local partnerships. And those plans provide, an opportunity to integrate these values again at a landscape type of level. They provide emphasis on natural plant communities, a management kind of a philosophy of trying to manage towards natural plant communities in these regions. They help articulate future desired conditions so people have a shared vision, perhaps, of what their forests and their other forest resources will look like in the future. They consider special needs of wildlife, especially species that require perhaps large contiguous habitat, large ranges of habitat. They're used to help guide other plans. So these are plans for plans. And so as you step these plans down at smaller landscapes, they provide some of the guidance for those types of plans to be developed. And most importantly, I think, they encourage ongoing coordination by the people who are coming together. And these are both resource professionals as well as local community leaders who are coming together to express what their priorities and interests are at the local level or the regional level. And then the plans, encourage these developers, writers, authors of the plans to continue to work together to implement the plan in a coordinated fashion. And then finally, at a statewide level, we're looking at how policies and programs can be developed that are multifaceted. And the value of doing a collaborative effort at the statewide level is it brings a lot more strength and a stronger voice to these types of ideas. And so, we just a smattering of some examples over time of how that type of collaboration has led to some really good things. Just one example might be the moose habitat cooperative work that's being done, large scale type of effort, again, bringing together wildlife and forest interests. The Sustainable Forest Incentives Act, something to provide incentives for private landowners to manage their lands and to maintain them in forest habitat, good for wildlife. Sustainable forest certification, another example of a program that helps encourage and maintain forest lands in forest in some type of a multi-use sustainable management program. Some things that are being talked about now is more contemporary examples of the Lake States Bat Habitat Conservation Plan, another example of a wildlife and forest cooperative effort to try to both conserve bat species while at the same time being able to maintain active forest management. And another example of this, the Minnesota Outdoor Heritage Program, an example of how, again, multiple groups from the wildlife and forest sectors coming together with a strong voice can create funding opportunities for collaborative work going forward. So those were kind of examples of scale to geography settings, and thinking about local, regional, and statewide scales. As you think about scales in time, the Forest Resources Council has been here for 25 years, and we're at a point in the council where we're really thinking about the next 25 years and trying to address what are the challenges and what are the opportunities going forward, and not being too hung up about all the a narrow viewpoint of what the conditions were 25 years ago. More important is to think about what are the conditions today, and how do we see the world in 2050, and what do we need to do in order to be able to maintain sustainable forests that provide these multiple benefits for ecology and for people. And one of the big issues we've been talking about, these are, again, no surprises to any of you, but you know, the issue of climate change. What is climate change doing? And you know, what has really been somewhat surprising is that even though we've been talking about it for you know, more than a decade, we're starting to really see the impacts of it today. I mean, it's happening today. And a lot of the paradigms that, if you were, you know, someone like me who, you know, went to school in the 1980s, and you were thinking about, I used to think about our conservation challenges as being sort of a linear thing. And now it's just completely, a lot of things I've taken for, you know, granted and assumptions, you know, have kind of gone out the window as we think about how some big paradigm changes are occurring as we realize how issues like the climate are changing more rapidly than we maybe had ever imagined, and that we need to respond in innovative ways and adaptive ways that we never maybe quite appreciated 30, 40 years ago. And so, you know, so the whole conservation field has been changing, thinking about these types of ability to be adaptive. And so we're working on updating those types of guidance and so on to reflect these type of needs to be deal with scale in time as well as space. Technology, another thing that's changing very rapidly. You know, the amazing to see about what's happening with LiDAR data and how that type of technology is going to just increase the amount of information that we have to make very good informed forest decisions and good informed wildlife decisions. And talking about the ideas that Eli introduced of, you know, as you're trying to consider building models that will predict wildlife response and wildlife abundance under different scenarios. This type of technology is going to, you know, just be dramatic in terms of our ability as managers and conservationists to be able to do much better decision making and have more predictability, hopefully, in the future. And finally, one other big challenge, which is also an opportunity, I think, has to do with private land management. So if you think about how things have changed perhaps over time with private lands being 44% of the forests that we have in Minnesota. And if you look at the graph on the right, and that top line is showing the trend in timber harvest on private lands. And it's, you know, it's a market decreasing trend. And what that probably means too is a decrease in maybe some of the active management of those private land forests. And so if you had any kind of question about maybe what might be changing in terms of private land, the attitudes or thinkings and objectives of private land owners, you know, just a little anecdotal example. If you look at the tree farm program, you know, it's been going on for many, many years. You know, you see tree farm signs out across the country on private lands. And in 2008, the tree farm program started introducing this idea of a family forest, an alternative sign, an alternative thinking to the tree farm, the historic tree farm. And when they introduced that sign, there was just an explosion of interest in people getting that new family forest sign. And I use that, again, just as an example about how private land stewardship and ownership is changing over time, and how that too provides both future challenges and opportunities. So I just want to thank everyone, you know, for having me here today. As much as anything, I'm here to learn from the rest of you. So thank you again, Eli, for having me. And later on, I'll be available for questions.